history of the Grunfeld, and it was created actually by a guy called Mohishundar Banerjee. It's not named the Banerjee defence, but it's named the Grunfeld defence because it was first introduced to the international play by Ernst Grunfeld in 1922 when he was playing against the future world champion Alexander Alekhine, in which that game he actually won. There's a number of variations. I think it's quite a nice opening, and it's still played quite a lot by. It was played by Vasily Smyslov, Viktor Korchnoi, Bobby Fischer, Gary Kasparov played it against Karpov 1986, 87 and 90. Kramnik still plays it in 2000, and I was going through my chess magazines this week to have a look at Grunfeld, and quite a lot of people were playing it too. I noticed that in 1855, that's when it was being played against by Banerjee against John Cochrane, and I came across this little bit of information about John Cochrane too, which I thought was quite interesting. He was a Scottish chess master. He lived between 1798 and 1878, and after serving the Royal Navy, Cochrane chose to become a barrister, and while studying law he became a very strong chess player and published a book on the game, which included the Cochrane variation of the Salvio Gambit, a main line of the King's Gambit. Yes, you can get on and talk about that for a while. So I want to just get into my game here quickly because I know we've only got 10 minutes. So the game started off with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, black castle. I played knight c3, d6, which I thought was a little bit slow, e3, bishop g4, bishop and g to e2, knight c6, and then I figured on. At this point, I worried for a little bit here, and I thought that I realized that I would probably have to give up kingside castling, but if I was to take the knight on c6, it would lead to perhaps a doubling of pawns that could actually lead to a tripling of pawns, or I could at least try and stop those double pawns and give me a target to aim with. So I thought about that. Perhaps maybe the correct move rather than after knight c6 might have just simply been the castle. But I thought with b takes c6 I created some sort of weakness, and then followed up with c5. He played bishop f3, which I knew he was going to play. It's a good move, and it prevents kingside castling after rook g1. So the game continues with d takes c5, which actually triples those pawns for a slight amount of time. If I, rather than taking it, I decide on queen a4 to hit the pawn on c6, as long as I can remove that bishop on f3. Game continues with c takes d4, and then knight takes d4, arguably removing the bishop on f3, and then causing weakness in that c6 pawn, which must be then hanging. In the post-mortem, my table 1 dude said to me that I should, after the bishop goes to g4, I should have just captured that pawn immediately. But I thought the follow-up move, c take d4, was needed just to push that bishop a little bit further back away from my camp to see if I could perhaps castle queenside. Once the bishop comes back to e6, I thought it was a terrible place to put it. I thought perhaps d7 would have been a better place, supporting the c6 there. I didn't really see why he didn't play it, because after e6 then it just leads to knight takes e6 with more double pawns, although it does open up the b, g and f file for black, which I suppose is very active, and actually is why this leads to such a sharp game. Bishop d2, queen d3, which prevents queenside castle. I think it's a lovely place, and it's probably the place the queen should sit for black. However, it allows me to go queen takes c6, rook and a to d8 with the mate threat coming. You can see it there on d2. I figure on the in-between moves, just another 1 or 2 pawn snaps, which are queen e6, king h8, and then rook g2 just to defend the mate square. He plays knight g8. This knight is just in the right place at the right time, and therefore defends the loss of another pawn on e7 there, and that knight performs very functional play. because it defends e7, which pretty much slows that attack down. Now the next move then is rook d1. One of my rules at the minute has been to try and set up some discovery play, so masking play behind other pieces and to wait for the correct moment to unleash, and therefore rook d1 was the idea. However, it did leave the f3 pawn hanging, and with hindsight I think f2 would have been better than rook d1 at that point. However, the game continues with rook f2, rook on d to f8, and then bishop c1 to unleash that discovery. Black plays quite actively with queen takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes c3, rook d2, queen b2 to pin bishop to the rook, and then rook takes f3, and then rook takes f3. Now, it was this particular position that I want to make this video about. I wasn't going to try and I didn't really want to make this video because I'm worried that people that I'm playing are watching my games. So if anybody's out there watching my games who's playing me next week, fair play. This is what I want to talk about, and it's forking an occupied square and a piece. Forking an unoccupied square and a piece. You can see here, once he's played rook takes f3 and my queen is on e6. If I move my queen to c6 now, I'm attacking the c3 square and his rook, and therefore he can't defend both of those particular pieces. One, a piece, and two, an unoccupied very active square, which the bishop can land on with the king locked up in the corner there, and meaning he will lose his queen. So that was a position which was very, very active. In fact, it was available here, but it's available later on again in the game. So rather than queen c6, which I should have potentially played with lines such as queen c6, rook f5, queen c3, and then sorry, not queen c3. What am I talking about? It's rather than after it's rook f5, then it's bishop c3 check with the loss of the queen. So that is the way the game should have went. However, after rook f3, I played king e2 to try and push the king back. And I actually think that I thought in the game that black had check, and if I hadn't have taken the rook, it would have been mate, but that wasn't the positional play because I could have, rather than that, I could have just took the rook, you see. So that wasn't on. After king e2, then we had f5, followed by queen a6, f6, c4, and then rook f5. And again here you can see the bishop move to c3 is still on here, but instead of playing bishop to c3 check, I exchanged the queens off, and the knight came forward, rook d7, and then we kind of ended up into quite a slow assault, which is pretty even for both at the minute. And I'm just going to lead up to a position here what I want to talk about, which is here, which is the talkable position. Now, after king d7, what is white's move? If you want to, I'm going to leave you for 5 seconds, or if you want to pause the video. What is white's move? Okay, so does he take the pawn is really the question. If I take the pawn such as this, unfortunately we have rook c5, which was my defining blunder of the game, which leads to the loss of the bishop after b4, rook takes a5, e4, knight d6, rook a6, rook takes a2, rook h8, h5, rook h7, king c6, rook h6, rook a4, king d3, knight takes e4, rook g6, check, and king b5, and it pretty much ends here. I've obviously lost the bishop with the fork, so there's a couple of things that I just wanted to cover in that game. Just to go back to the game, which is this position here, which is very active. this move after the rook takes. I missed the move, which is um, what I call forking an unoccupied active square and a piece, which is quite a neat wee way to end this video, which is you don't obviously have to always fork a piece. It can be forking a square that if you can get to in the next move is very, very active and causes a sharp play. So, and that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if anybody has any comments, please leave a comment. If you want to rate it, please leave a rating. And if you want to subscribe, please subscribe. Thank you.